When people hear about Dajjal, many imagine a single individual who will appear at the end of time. Yet this limited understanding causes a dangerous neglect of the deeper reality that deception operates as a system long before it manifests as a person, because deception is not sudden, it is cultivated, normalized, and intellectually justified over generations. And this is why prophetic warnings emphasize awareness rather than curiosity about appearance or location, as the real danger lies in how falsehood reshapes perception until truth feels uncomfortable and illusion feels familiar. Throughout history, every civilization that drifted away from divine guidance experienced this pattern where human intellect was elevated above revelation, material success was treated as proof of moral correctness, and power was confused with truth. And in such environments, deception flourishes quietly, not by rejecting faith outright, but by redefining it, emptying it of submission, humility, and accountability. In the modern world, this system has reached unprecedented sophistication, where technology accelerates influence, media reframes morality, and language itself is engineered to blur distinctions between right and wrong, making people believe they are thinking freely while their assumptions are carefully programmed. And this is precisely how deception works at its highest level, not by coercion but by consent, not by chains but by desire. When truth is reduced to opinion and falsehood is defended as personal freedom, the foundation of certainty collapses, and once certainty collapses, people become vulnerable to any narrative that offers comfort, identity, or superiority. This is why deception often presents itself as enlightenment, progress, or liberation, while portraying faith as outdated, restrictive, or irrational, even though true faith has always been the source of intellectual discipline, ethical restraint, and inner balance. A system of deception does not require people to deny God verbally. It only needs them to live as if God is irrelevant, distant, or unnecessary. And this is achieved by keeping people distracted, emotionally overstimulated, and spiritually undernourished. When life becomes centered on consumption, image, and self-validation, the soul gradually loses its sensitivity to truth, much like eyes lose their ability to see clearly when constantly exposed to artificial light. Knowledge increases, but wisdom declines, because wisdom requires moral grounding, and moral grounding requires submission to something higher than the ego. In such a climate, arrogance becomes celebrated as confidence, doubt is praised as intelligence, and obedience to divine guidance is mocked as weakness, even though history repeatedly shows that civilizations collapse not due to lack of intelligence, but due to moral confusion. This systemic deception trains people to question everything except their own desires, to challenge every authority except the authority of trends, and to rebel against every limit except the limits imposed by culture and fear of social exclusion. The danger here is subtle, because people feel empowered while actually becoming predictable, reactive, and easily controlled, as their values are shaped externally rather than rooted internally. Protection from this does not come from rejecting the modern world, but from understanding its influence, learning how narratives are constructed, recognizing how language manipulates emotion, and anchoring one's understanding of reality in revelation rather than reaction. When a person understands deception as a system, they stop waiting passively for a future event and begin taking responsibility for their beliefs, habits, and moral compass today, realizing that every compromise with falsehood weakens clarity, and every act of sincerity strengthens inner vision. This awareness transforms faith from a cultural identity into a conscious commitment, where truth is not negotiable, morality is not flexible, and success is not measured by dominance or popularity, but by alignment with divine purpose. Such individuals are not easily shaken by confusion, because they recognize patterns rather than personalities, principles rather than appearances, and reality rather than illusion. And this is the true safeguard against deception in any age, because when the heart is grounded in truth, no system of falsehood, no matter how advanced, can replace light with darkness. The greatest danger facing the human mind and soul is not the open presence of falsehood, but the deliberate confusion between truth and falsehood, because when falsehood is clearly visible, it can be resisted, yet when it is blended with truth, it becomes attractive, persuasive, and difficult to detect. And this is why deception has always relied on distortion rather than denial. Truth, by its nature, is clear, stable, and rooted in reality, whereas falsehood is unstable and requires constant reinforcement. So in order to survive, falsehood borrows the language, symbols, and appearance of truth, presenting itself as reasonable, compassionate, progressive, or intellectually superior, while gradually hollowing out the moral and spiritual foundations that give truth its meaning. When this confusion spreads, people no longer ask whether something is right or wrong, but whether it feels good, whether it is popular, or whether it aligns with personal preference. And once morality is shifted from objective guidance to subjective emotion, truth becomes fragmented and falsehood gains legitimacy. In such an environment, certainty is portrayed as ignorance, while doubt is celebrated as intelligence. Constant doubt without grounding leads not to wisdom but to paralysis and anxiety. The human being requires clarity to live meaningfully, yet confusion is marketed as sophistication, creating generations who are informed but not anchored, expressive but not principled, confident in speech but uncertain in purpose. This confusion does not emerge naturally. It is cultivated through repetition, selective information, and emotional manipulation, where words are redefined, values are inverted, and boundaries are deliberately blurred, so that obedience is labeled oppression, discipline is called extremism, and moral restraint is framed as backwardness. Once language is corrupted, thought follows, and once thought is destabilized, behavior becomes easily influenced, which is why controlling narratives has always been more powerful than controlling armies. When truth and falsehood coexist without distinction, people begin to believe that everything is relative, that there is no ultimate right or wrong, only perspectives. And this belief quietly removes accountability, because if nothing is truly wrong, nothing truly needs repentance, correction, or moral struggle. This confusion also creates internal conflict within individuals, as the heart naturally inclines toward meaning and order, while the mind is flooded with contradictory messages, resulting in stress, identity confusion, and spiritual emptiness. Even among those who appear successful or confident outwardly, the most effective form of deception does not demand that people abandon faith, but that they reinterpret it until it loses its authority over behavior, turning it into a personal symbol rather than a guiding framework, something respected in theory but ignored in practice. When truth is reduced to a personal opinion, it can no longer challenge desire, ego, or social pressure. And once truth loses its power, confront, falsehood gains freedom to operate without resistance. This confusion is further intensified by speed, as modern life leaves little room for reflection, contemplation, or deep learning, causing people to react rather than reason, to consume information rather than digest it, and to adopt conclusions without understanding their foundations. Over time, this weakens discernment, making people emotionally driven and easily polarized, where loyalty to groups replaces loyalty to principles, and defending an identity becomes more important than seeking truth. The tragedy of this state is that people believe they are thinking independently while unknowingly echoing narratives they have never critically examined, mistaking exposure for understanding and repetition for conviction. Clarity, on the other hand, requires effort, humility, and patience, because truth often challenges comfort, questions assumptions, and demands self-discipline, which is why it is resisted in environments that prioritize ease and pleasure. The resolution to this confusion lies not in rejecting questions, but in restoring proper criteria for answering them. Where revelation provides moral boundaries, reason operates within ethical limits, and experience is interpreted through a higher purpose rather than raw desire. When individuals learn to distinguish between truth and falsehood clearly, they regain inner stability, because certainty brings peace, direction, and resilience, allowing them to engage with the world without being consumed by it. Such clarity does not make a person rigid or hostile, but principled and grounded, capable of compassion without compromise and understanding without surrendering values. In a world that profits from confusion, choosing clarity becomes an act of courage, and maintaining truth becomes a form of resistance, because when truth is recognized and lived, deception loses its power, no matter how persuasive, widespread, or beautifully packaged it appears. One of the most powerful instruments through which deception spreads in every age is the control of attention, and in the modern world, This control is exercised primarily through technology and media, not as neutral tools, but as shaping forces that influence how people think, feel, and interpret reality. Because whatever consistently occupies the mind eventually forms the heart, and whatever forms the heart ultimately directs behavior. Technology in itself is neither righteous nor corrupt, but when it becomes the dominant lens through which the world is understood, it subtly trains people to value speed over depth, reaction over reflection, and visibility over substance, creating minds that are constantly stimulated yet rarely satisfied, informed yet rarely transformed. Media does not simply report reality, it frames it, selecting what deserves attention, how it should be interpreted, and which emotions should accompany it. And when this framing is driven by profit, power, or ideology rather than truth, it becomes a mechanism of manipulation rather than education. Repeated exposure to certain narratives gradually normalizes them, even if they contradict moral intuition, because the human mind becomes familiar with what it sees often, and familiarity breeds acceptance, making even the most distorted ideas feel ordinary over time. This is how boundaries are shifted, not through sudden shock, but through gradual desensitization, where each step seems small and harmless until the cumulative effect results in a complete transformation of values. The danger lies not only in explicit falsehood, but in selective truth, where information is technically accurate yet intentionally incomplete, leading people to conclusions that serve a particular agenda while appearing intellectually honest. When people consume content without questioning its source, intention, or emotional pull, they become vulnerable to influence, mistaking stimulation for insight and engagement for understanding. Algorithms intensify this effect by feeding individuals what aligns with their existing preferences and emotions, creating echo chambers that reinforce belief without challenge, confidence without humility, and outrage without wisdom, isolating people from broader perspectives while convincing them they are well informed. In such an environment, identity becomes entangled with opinion, so questioning an idea feels like a personal attack, and dialogue gives way to hostility, further weakening the ability to discern truth calmly and objectively. Constant exposure to curated images of success, beauty, and happiness also distorts expectations, causing people to measure their worth against artificial standards, leading to insecurity, envy, and dissatisfaction. Emotions that make the soul more susceptible to deception because a restless heart seeks escape rather than truth. When entertainment replaces contemplation and distraction replaces remembrance, the inner life becomes shallow, and without inner depth, external influence becomes dominant. Spiritual awareness requires silence, focus, and presence, yet modern systems are designed to eliminate silence, filling every moment with noise, updates, and demands for attention, leaving little space for self-examination or connection to higher purpose. This constant mental occupation weakens the ability to recognize manipulation, because discernment requires distance, and distance requires intentional withdrawal from overstimulation. The most effective form of deception is not forcing people to believe something false, but preventing them from thinking deeply enough to recognize truth, keeping them busy, entertained, and emotionally reactive so that life passes without reflection. This is why individuals may feel exhausted, despite comfort, anxious despite convenience, and empty despite abundance, because their inner needs are neglected, while external desires are endlessly fed. Reclaiming control over attention is therefore a spiritual act, requiring conscious limits on consumption, intentional seeking of beneficial knowledge, and regular engagement with sources of guidance that nourish the heart rather than exploit it. When people learn to slow down, reflect, and evaluate what they absorb, technology returns to its rightful place as a tool rather than a master, and media loses its power to define reality unchallenged. This balance allows individuals to engage with the modern world intelligently without surrendering their values. Using information without being used by it, clarity emerges when attention is directed toward what is meaningful rather than merely attractive. and when the heart is trained to seek purpose rather than stimulation. In such a state, deception struggles to take root, because a focused mind, a grounded heart, and a disciplined use of tools create resilience against manipulation, ensuring that progress enhances humanity rather than eroding it, and that modern advancements serve truth instead of replacing it. One of the most dangerous illusions in any age is the belief that the accumulation of knowledge alone is enough to protect humanity from error, because knowledge without guidance does not necessarily lead to humility, wisdom, or moral clarity, but often produces arrogance, confusion, and a false sense of superiority, as history repeatedly demonstrates that civilizations do not collapse due to ignorance alone, but due to misused intelligence detached from ethical and spiritual grounding. When knowledge is severed from higher purpose, it becomes a tool that serves desire, power, and ego rather than truth, and instead of illuminating the path, it blinds the heart with self-admiration, making individuals believe that understanding how something works is equivalent to understanding why it exists. This is why people may master sciences, technologies, and philosophies while remaining profoundly lost in matters of meaning, accountability, and inner peace, because information answers questions of function but not questions of purpose, and purpose cannot be discovered through experimentation alone, as it requires submission to something beyond the self. Arrogance emerges when the human intellect begins to see itself as the ultimate authority, judging everything while refusing to be judged, questioning every tradition while exempting its own assumptions from scrutiny. And this arrogance is subtle because it often disguises itself as confidence, rationality, or enlightenment, even though it erodes humility and reverence, which are essential for genuine understanding. When individuals believe that human reason alone is sufficient to define morality, they unknowingly elevate their limited perspective to the level of absolute truth, ignoring the fact that human perception is shaped by bias, desire, fear, and social conditioning, making it unstable as a moral compass. Knowledge, when guided by revelation and ethical discipline, produces humility because it reveals the vastness of what is unknown. But when divorced from guidance, it produces pride because it focuses only on what is controlled, measured, and mastered. This pride creates resistance to correction, making people emotionally attached to their conclusions rather than committed to truth. And once attachment replaces sincerity, learning becomes selective, where information is accepted or rejected based on convenience rather than validity. Such individuals may speak eloquently about justice while justifying oppression, advocate freedom while denying accountability, and praise progress while ignoring its moral cost, because without guidance, intelligence serves whatever narrative preserves self-image and social status. This condition is especially dangerous in the modern world, where access to information creates the illusion of expertise, allowing people to form strong opinions without deep understanding, patience, or ethical responsibility, and where public validation replaces internal integrity as the measure of success. Arrogance also distances people from repentance, because repentance requires acknowledging limitation and error, while unguided knowledge encourages the belief that mistakes are merely differences of perspective rather than moral failings, gradually numbing the conscience and weakening the sense of responsibility. When the heart is no longer guided, knowledge becomes fragmented, lacking coherence, causing people to live with contradictions they no longer recognize as contradictions, such as valuing compassion while celebrating cruelty, or advocating equality while practicing exclusion. This inner inconsistency creates psychological strain, which is often masked by distraction, entertainment, or constant argumentation, but never truly resolved. Guidance provides a unifying framework that aligns intellect, emotion, and action, ensuring that knowledge serves growth rather than ego, and clarity rather than confusion. Without this framework, intelligence becomes reactive, shaped by trends and peer approval rather than principle, making people vulnerable to manipulation because pride resists submission, and resistance to submission opens the door to deception. True protection from error lies not in knowing more facts, but in knowing one's place, recognizing the limits of human understanding, and accepting that wisdom begins where arrogance ends. When knowledge is combined with humility, it produces discernment, patience, and justice. But when separated from guidance, it produces restlessness, argumentation, and moral instability. This is why guidance does not suppress intellect, but disciplines it, directing it toward beneficial ends and protecting it from becoming a servant of desire. A guided intellect asks not only is this possible, but is this right? And not only can we, but should we, restoring ethical responsibility to decision making. Such an intellect recognizes that progress without morality is regression, and power without accountability is corruption. And this awareness safeguards both individual character and collective well-being. When people reconnect knowledge to guidance, learning becomes an act of worship rather than self-glorification. And understanding becomes a means of drawing closer to truth rather than elevating the ego above it. In this state, intelligence no longer competes with faith but supports it, reinforcing humility, strengthening conscience, and cultivating a balanced worldview where advancement serves humanity instead of enslaving it, and where wisdom, not arrogance, becomes the highest achievement. True protection from deception does not lie in fear, withdrawal, or blind opposition to the world. Be in the cultivation of spiritual awareness, disciplined thinking, and a living connection with Allah that informs every aspect of life. Because deception thrives where the heart is neglected and the mind is untrained, and it weakens wherever consciousness, sincerity, and purpose are present. Spiritual awareness begins with recognizing that life is not random, that existence carries meaning, and that every action, intention, and belief has consequences beyond the immediate moment, which restores seriousness to moral choices in an age that trivializes them. When a person lives with awareness of accountability, they no longer evaluate decisions solely by convenience, pleasure, or social approval, but by alignment with truth and long-term impact on the soul. And this awareness acts as an inner compass that remains stable even when external values shift. Critical thinking, when grounded in guidance, is not skepticism for its own sake, but the disciplined ability to distinguish evidence from emotion, principle from preference, and truth from persuasion, allowing individuals to engage with ideas without being absorbed by them. Such thinking resists manipulation because it asks essential questions. Who benefits from this narrative? What assumptions are being hidden? What values are being promoted? And what consequences are being ignored? Transforming the mind from a passive consumer into an active evaluator. Without this discipline, people become vulnerable not because they are unintelligent, but because their thinking is reactive, driven by outrage, fear, or desire, rather than reflection. And reaction is the preferred state for those who seek to influence behavior without resistance. Spiritual awareness strengthens critical thinking by purifying intention, ensuring that the pursuit of truth is not distorted by ego, identity, or the need to be right, because a heart attaché to Allah values sincerity over victory and correction over validation. This balance protects individuals from both blind conformity and arrogant rejection, allowing them to benefit from knowledge while remaining anchored in moral clarity. Connection with Allah is the foundation of this protection, because remembrance cultivates humility, patience, and perspective, qualities that deception finds difficult to penetrate, as a heart that remembers its creator is less likely to worship trends, personalities, or ideologies. This connection is not limited to rituals, though rituals are essential, but extends to how one sees the world, interprets success and failure, and responds to difficulty, transforming faith from a compartmentalized practice into a comprehensive worldview. When remembrance becomes consistent, it softens the heart, making it receptive to guidance and resistant to arrogance, because arrogance thrives in forgetfulness, while humility grows in awareness of dependence. Such a heart is not easily shaken by confusion, because it draws stability from something higher than circumstance, popularity, or power. This inner stability allows individuals to navigate complexity without losing direction, to engage with diversity without losing identity, and to face pressure without surrendering principles. Protection also requires intentional habits, such as regulating what one consumes intellectually and emotionally, because the mind, like the body, is affected by its diet, and constant exposure to harmful narratives weakens discernment even in those with good intentions. Choosing beneficial knowledge, meaningful relationships, and reflective practices creates an environment where clarity can flourish, reinforcing inner resilience. Education in this sense is not merely the accumulation of facts, but the formation of character, where learning increases responsibility. Far than pride, and understanding deepens compassion rather than hostility. Such education teaches individuals to listen before reacting, to verify before sharing, and to seek wisdom rather than dominance, restoring depth to discourse in a culture driven by speed and spectacle. Community also plays a vital role, as isolation weakens resistance, while collective remembrance, learning, and accountability strengthen it, providing support against doubt and reinforcement of shared values. When individuals surround themselves with those committed to truth, sincerity, and growth, they benefit from mutual correction and encouragement, reducing vulnerability to manipulation. This collective strength does not suppress individuality, but refines it, aligning personal development with ethical responsibility. Ultimately, protection from deception is an ongoing process, not a single achievement, requiring vigilance without paranoia, engagement without compromise, and confidence without arrogance. It demands effort because clarity is not accidental, but the result of conscious choices made consistently over time. Those who invest in spiritual awareness, disciplined thinking, and sincere connection with Allah do not become detached from reality, but more deeply rooted in it, capable of recognizing illusion without being fascinated by it, and of appreciating progress without worshipping it. Such individuals understand that truth does not need exaggeration, that guidance does not require coercion, and that faith is strongest when lived with wisdom and balance. In a world where confusion is profitable and distraction is constant, choosing awareness becomes an act of courage, and maintaining clarity becomes a form of worship, ensuring that no matter how sophisticated deception becomes, it cannot extinguish the light of a heart that sees, a mind that thinks, and a soul that remembers its Lord.